After 32 years as a forensic accountant, I thought I had seen every way a person could steal from someone who trusted them. I had uncovered embezzlement schemes inside Fortune 500 companies, exposed pension fraud that destroyed retirement funds, and testified in federal court against men in suits who smiled at their victims while emptying their savings. I had seen it all. Or so I believed. Nothing in 3 decades of chasing paper trails prepared me for sitting at the head of my own birthday dinner table and watching my son-in-law sign documents that would quietly erase everything I had built. Documents he had forged using my dead wife's notary seal. Documents he had been carrying in his jacket pocket all evening, waiting for the right moment. He thought I was just a sentimental old man distracted by birthday candles. He forgot who raised me. And he forgot who taught me that the most dangerous trap is the one the target doesn't know exists until it has already closed. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, he had signed 3 documents that he believed would make him rich. What he didn't know was that I had already replaced every single one of them. If you want to know how a retired forensic accountant dismantled his son-in-law's entire scheme without raising his voice once, stay with me. This is the story of the quietest revenge I ever delivered and the most personal. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent the better part of my life being careful with numbers, careful with trust, and not careful enough with the man my daughter brought home 6 years ago. My daughter is 34 years old. She has her mother's eyes and, unfortunately, her mother's blind loyalty to people who manufacture charm for a living. My wife passed away 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast and brutal, and it left a hole in our family that never fully closed. My daughter grieved deeply, and in that grief, she was vulnerable in ways I did not fully appreciate until it was too late. My son-in-law arrived 8 months after the funeral, introduced through a mutual friend at a charity event. He was handsome, attentive, and apparently fascinated by a grieving woman with a father who had a lake house in Vermont, a fully paid mortgage, and a retirement portfolio worth just over $1.5 million. Within 14 months, they were married. I gave my blessing because my daughter was radiant at that wedding, and I chose to believe that meant she was happy rather than medicated by infatuation. The warning signs came quietly, the way they always do. My daughter stopped calling me on Sunday mornings the way she had since she was in college. Then, she stopped coming to the lake house alone, always arriving with him in tow, always with his hand on her lower back, in a way that looked like affection and felt, to my trained eye, like supervision. She stopped finishing her own sentences when he was in the room. She started apologizing for things that did not require apology. She lost weight she did not need to lose and explained it away as stress from her job. A job she quit 6 months into the marriage because, as she told me cheerfully over the phone, her husband preferred her home. I noticed. I said nothing. I was trying to be a good father rather than an interfering one, and I am not sure I will ever fully forgive myself for the distinction. The first concrete evidence arrived 14 months ago, not as a suspicion, but as a number. Numbers are my language, the only one I have ever trusted completely. I was reviewing the quarterly statements on the investment account I had set up jointly with my daughter years ago, a college fund initially that I had rolled over into a shared account after she graduated, intended as her emergency safety net. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically lower, not the kind of drop that triggers fraud alerts, just slightly, carefully lower, the way water drains from a bathtub with a slow leak enough to ignore if you are not paying attention, impossible to ignore if you are. I did not call the bank. I did not call my daughter. I opened a spreadsheet and I started pulling 12 months of transaction history, line by line, the same way I had done 1,000 times in courtrooms and boardrooms. What I found took me 3 evenings of careful work to fully map. The withdrawals were small, between $400 and $900 each, always on weekdays, always through an ATM that was not the one nearest my daughter's apartment, always timed between 9 and 11 in the morning when she would have been home and he would have theoretically been at work. 41 separate transactions over 11 months. Just under $30,000 in total, drawn down so gradually that the account's automatic balance notifications never triggered. He was good. He was patient. And he had clearly done this before. I hired a private investigator on a Friday afternoon and told no one. By the following Tuesday, I had a preliminary picture of my son-in-law that was considerably more detailed than the one my daughter had been given. His real name was not the name he used socially, a legal name change 7 years ago, which is not inherently suspicious, but becomes very suspicious when combined with a prior civil judgment in Arizona for breach of fiduciary duty, a pattern of short-term relationships with women in their early 30s who came from stable family money, and a LLC registered in Nevada that had processed over $300,000 in the past 2 years and had no discernible business activity. He was a professional. My daughter was not his first project, and I had a very strong feeling I was the next phase. I did not confront him. I had spent 32 years watching amateurs confront financial criminals, and I had watched it fail every single time. Confrontation does 2 things. It alerts the target, and it destroys the evidence trail. I had not survived 3 decades in forensic accounting by making amateur mistakes. I went back to my spreadsheet, and I started building the full picture. Quietly, methodically, without anyone knowing I was doing it. The birthday dinner was his idea. He called me himself, which he rarely did, to suggest that the family gather at the lake house to celebrate my 65th birthday. He was warm and enthusiastic in a way that would have been flattering if I had not already spent 6 weeks mapping his financial architecture. I understood immediately what the dinner was. It was the closing ceremony. It was the moment he had been building toward for the past 1.5 years. The occasion when sentiment and celebration would lower my guard just enough for him to slide the final pieces into place. I said yes. I told him I was touched. And then I spent the 3 weeks before the dinner building the most elegant trap I had ever constructed in my professional life. I spoke to my attorney on a Monday morning, a woman I had worked with for 20 years who did not ask unnecessary questions. I explained what I needed, and she had the documents ready within a week. They looked identical to the real ones: the transfer of property authorization, the revised beneficiary designation on my investment account, and the durable power of attorney that he had been maneuvering toward since the moment he married my daughter. The real documents were locked in a safety deposit box at a branch an hour from my house. The ones I placed in my desk drawer were perfect replicas, identical in every formatting detail, signed with my actual signature, notarized with a legitimate seal. But the account numbers were wrong. Not obviously wrong, wrong in the way that only becomes apparent during processing, when a bank clerk runs the routing information and finds that it points to an account that does not exist in the system. The property authorization referenced a parcel ID that belonged to a commercial lot in another county. The power of attorney contained a single clause buried in the middle of the 3rd page that rendered the entire document void upon presentation without a second witness signature that was not on the form. He would take them, feel victorious, and then watch every single one collapse the moment he tried to use them. But I wanted more than a failed scheme. I needed the full picture on record, documented in a way that would hold in court. For that, I needed him to incriminate himself completely, in his own words, in a conversation he did not know was being recorded. Vermont is a one-party consent state. I had checked. The evening of the dinner, he arrived first with my daughter, 40 minutes before the rest of the family. He was wearing a blue blazer, and the particular smile I had come to think of as his working face, warm eyes, relaxed jaw, slightly too much eye contact. He shook my hand with both of his and told me I looked great for 65. My daughter hugged me for a long time, and I felt through the embrace how thin she had become, how her shoulder blades felt sharp under my palms. I held her a moment longer than was necessary, and she let me, which told me something about how starved she was for uncomplicated affection. We had a glass of wine on the porch before the others arrived. He guided the conversation skillfully, asking about my health, my retirement plans, whether I had thought about what would happen to the lake house long term. He was laying groundwork in real time, and I let him lay it, responding with appropriate vagueness and manufactured sentimentality. I told him I had been thinking a lot about getting my affairs in order. I told him the paperwork had been sitting on my desk for weeks, and I kept meaning to deal with it. I watched his eyes settle slightly at that. A small calibration, the kind a person makes when a plan is moving toward its intended conclusion. The rest of the family arrived by 7. My brother and his wife, my daughter's 2 closest friends, and my neighbor from across the lake, who had been a family friend for 30 years. Dinner was lobster bisque and grilled salmon, my wife's menu for special occasions, which my daughter had recreated from the handwritten recipe card she kept in her wallet. Watching her carry plates from the kitchen with her husband's hand never far from her elbow, I felt the specific and disorienting grief of recognizing that a person you love is being diminished in front of you by someone who has learned to do it so gradually that even the victim cannot feel it happening. After the cake, after the candles, after the photographs and the toasts, and the moment my neighbor told a story about my wife that made my daughter cry in the good way that grief sometimes becomes, he found his opening. The other guests had moved to the porch. My daughter was in the kitchen with her friend. He appeared in the doorway of my study, where I had drifted to escape the noise for a moment, and he asked if we could talk privately. Just the two of us, father to son. He sat across from me in the leather chair my wife used to read in. He folded his hands on his knee, and his expression shifted into something I can only describe as rehearsed sincerity. He told me that he had been worried about me. He said that he and my daughter had been discussing the future, and they wanted to make sure I was protected. He used the word protected 4 times in 3 minutes, which is the verbal equivalent of a signature. He talked about estate planning, about the complexity of managing assets alone at my age, about how a simple restructuring of my accounts could save significant tax liability and ensure my daughter was cared for no matter what happened. He was careful, thorough, and almost convincing. Then he asked if I had looked at those documents on my desk. I said I had. I said I had been meaning to go over them with my attorney, but I kept putting it off, and maybe tonight was as good a time as any. I said I trusted his judgment. I watched him absorb the words, and I watched the working face smooth into something that was almost real relief. I pulled the documents from the desk drawer. He reviewed them quickly, not carefully, the mistake of a man who believes he already knows what he is looking at. He pointed to the signature lines. He had brought a pen, which told me everything about how long he had been planning this specific moment. He talked me through each document in the reassuring tone of someone explaining something simple to someone limited, and I let him, nodding at the appropriate moments, asking small clarifying questions that gave him the opportunity to explain his intentions in his own words into the voice recorder sitting behind the framed photograph of my wife on the corner of the desk. When I signed my actual name. The documents were already designed to be worthless. The signature was real. What he did not know was that what he was holding was a very detailed written record of a scheme to fraudulently obtain financial control over a competent adult's assets through deception and misrepresentation, and that I had just captured 40 minutes of him explaining it out loud. He shook my hand again when we rejoined the party. He was expansive and generous for the rest of the evening, the way people are when they believe they have just won something. He poured wine for everyone. He told the story of how he and my daughter met, which was the polished version rather than the accurate one. He put his arm around my shoulders in front of my brother and called me the best father-in-law a man could ask for. I thanked him. 3 days later, I placed the recording, the transaction history, the investigator's report, and the fraudulent documents in a package that my attorney delivered by hand to the district attorney's office. I sent a separate package to the Nevada Secretary of State requesting a formal audit of the LLC. I forwarded the Arizona civil judgment to the investigator my daughter's state bar association uses for background screening, not because he was an attorney, but because the referral network for financial fraud cases crosses professional lines, and I knew the document would find its way to the right desk. Then I called my daughter. That conversation was the hardest thing I have done since my wife's last week in hospice. My daughter did not believe me immediately. She pushed back, then argued, then went quiet in a way that frightened me more than the arguing. I did not rush her. I sent her the bank records and the investigator's report through an encrypted link my attorney set up, with a note that said, "I am not asking you to leave him. I am asking you to look at this and decide for yourself what you are looking at." I told her I would be at the lake house every day that week, and she could call me any time. She called on the 3rd day. She had been through the documents. She had gone into his email using a password she had seen him type, without his knowing she had memorized it. She had found messages I had not found. earlier patterns, a woman before her who matched the same profile, and what appeared to be a conversation with someone she did not recognize about the timeline for accessing my accounts. She was not crying when she called me. She was the specific kind of quiet that comes after the crying has run out and what remains is clarity. She said, "Dad, I think I've been really stupid." I said, "You trusted someone you loved. That's not stupid. That's human. The stupid one is the man who looked at what we have and thought he could take it without anyone noticing." She stayed at her friend's apartment that night. She filed for a separation the following week. I did not tell her what to do. I did not need to. Once the fog of manipulation clears, a person with my daughter's intelligence does not need direction. She needs space, and the knowledge that there is solid ground under her feet. The district attorney's office moved faster than I expected. The combination of the recorded conversation, the forged notary seal, which my wife had been issued professionally, and which he had apparently found and kept after her death without my knowledge, and the transaction history across multiple accounts built a case that a prosecutor called, in a conversation my attorney relayed to me, unusually well documented. Charges were filed on a Thursday morning: wire fraud, forgery of a legal instrument, unlawful use of a notary seal, financial exploitation of an at-risk adult. That last charge stung me personally, because it required acknowledging that I was the at-risk adult in question. But I set the feeling aside. Accurate language matters. It matters in court, and it matters in the record. He was arrested at the apartment while my daughter was at work. She texted me immediately when she found out. 2 words. "It's done." I sat at my kitchen table and looked out at the lake for a long time without moving. The part that came after the arrest was not clean or simple, and I want to be honest about that because this is the part the stories usually skip. My daughter blamed herself for almost 2 months. She went through periods of defending him, not because she believed he was innocent, but because dismantling a relationship, even a harmful one, requires grieving the version of it you believed you were living. She had grief for the marriage she thought she had, and she deserved the space to feel it completely without me offering commentary. I drove to see her every 2 weeks. I brought food, the kind of food that takes effort. Her grandmother's vegetable soup, the cornbread from the recipe box, the apple cake my wife made every October. Not because food solves anything, but because showing up with something made by hand is the language of care that does not require explanation. I did not tell her what to think about what had happened to her. I did not analyze his behavior in her presence or offer forensic interpretations of the relationship. She had enough of that from other people. What she needed from me was to be her father rather than the investigator who had dismantled her marriage. So I tried, to the best of my ability, to be both things without letting one crowd out the other. What I found in those 2 months was something I had not anticipated. My daughter began to talk to me the way she had before he came into her life, openly and without the careful monitoring that had characterized our conversations for 5 years. She told me things she had been carrying alone, the way he had gradually separated her from her friends, the way he framed her professional ambitions as threats to their relationship, the way he would criticize her privately and compliment her publicly until she no longer trusted her own perception of either. She had been living inside a constructed reality for years, one designed to keep her compliant and isolated, and the dismantling of that reality was violent in its own way, even when the danger was gone. I listened. I did not offer solutions. For a forensic accountant who spent his career identifying problems and designing remedies, staying in the listening without reaching for the fix was the hardest professional adjustment of my retirement. She got a job 3 months after the separation. A good one. A financial compliance position at a regional firm that had read about the case in the local business press and reached out to her directly. She was nervous about taking it. She called me the night before her first day and asked if I thought she was ready. I told her she had spent the last 6 years being told she was less capable than she is by someone who needed her to believe that in order to control her. I told her the job had found her because people who actually know what competence looks like had recognized hers. I told her to go to work. She called me that evening from the parking lot before driving home and said she had been the most prepared person in the room. I believed her without question. The legal proceedings moved through the system over the better part of a year. He took a plea agreement rather than face the full evidentiary presentation, which would have included the recording and the complete transaction analysis I had compiled with my attorney's firm. The plea carried a felony conviction, restitution of all documented withdrawals, and 3 years of supervised probation. He will not practice financial advisory services in this state, or the adjacent 3 under the terms of the agreement. The investigator found evidence suggesting the woman in Arizona had never recovered the money from her civil judgment. I sent her attorney a letter. Many, they, her, and getter. There is a version of this story where I tell you I felt triumphant when the plea was entered. I did not. I felt tired and accurate. Tired because the weight of what had been done to my daughter and to my wife's memory, he had used her notary seal, her professional credential, the thing she had earned and kept current for 20 years, was not something a legal outcome resolves. Accurate because the right result had occurred and the record reflected reality rather than the constructed version he had tried to impose on all of us. My daughter is doing well. She renewed her lease last spring. Got a dog. A big, confused rescue hound named Gerald, who destroys her throw pillows and apparently sleeps across her feet every night. She comes to the lake house alone now, the way she used to. On Sunday mornings when the weather is good, she brings the dog. We drink coffee on the porch and watch the water, and sometimes we talk about her mother and sometimes we just sit. I turned 66 last month. No dinner party, just my daughter, my brother, my neighbor from across the lake, and Gerald attempting to eat the birthday cake before anyone had a slice. It was the best birthday I have had in years. I have thought a great deal about what I would say if someone asked me what the real lesson was in all of this. I have turned the question over during the long evenings at the lake, when the house is quiet and the account statements are closed and there is nothing left to audit. What I keep returning to is this. The people who steal from us are rarely strangers. They are almost always people we chose, people we invited in, people we gave access to because we believed the warmth they performed was real. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent my entire career identifying deception in numbers. And it still took me 18 months to see clearly what was happening to my own family, because I was looking for the evidence I knew how to find, rather than the evidence that was actually in front of me. The numbers told me something was wrong. My daughter's shoulder blades, sharp under my palms during a hug, told me something worse. If I had learned to weight those 2 things equally from the beginning, I would have moved faster. I did not. That is mine to carry. What I can tell you with certainty is that the tools I had built over a lifetime, the patience, the documentation, the understanding that confrontation destroys evidence, the willingness to wait for the right moment rather than the satisfying one, those tools worked. Not because I am exceptional, because I was careful, and because I did not let my anger make me reckless. The most dangerous thing I did throughout the entire situation was stay calm. Calm is not passive. Calm is the condition under which good decisions are made and bad actors reveal themselves completely. He thought I was an old man counting down to sentiment. He forgot that the most experienced hunter in any room is not the loudest one. He forgot that the person who has spent the most time watching knows exactly what they are seeing. If the people in your life are asking you to trust them with your future, watch how they treat the present first. Watch what they do with small things before they ever have access to the large ones. Watch whether the warmth they show you exists when there is no audience. And if the numbers ever look slightly wrong, do not explain them away. Follow them to where they lead. I am 66 years old. I sleep well. The lake is clean and cold in the mornings. My daughter is building a life that belongs to her. Gerald the rescue hound ate my left slipper last week and shows no remorse whatsoever. I consider this progress on every front. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment and tell me where you are watching from. I read every one. Subscribe to the channel if you want to stay with me. And if you have your own story about protecting what matters, your family, your future, the thing someone else tried to take, I would genuinely like to hear it. None of us navigate this alone. That is the part they never tell you. And I think it is the part that matters most.